that's when I curb stomped his ass into the escalator, and blood was everywhere, and that's reason number 387 why it's fun to make a fifth grader cry.
Well, clearly he had it coming based on what you said earlier, about,
Oh, definitely.
the hijacking of the truck and the army of nuns.
Oh, no, I was okay with that. Just never cut in front of me on an escalator. Never. I mean, shit, we're live.
Hey, guys.
Hi, how you doing?
Hey, guy. Assuming, as far as I can tell, Kevin is watching this. So, hey, guy. Hey, Kev.
Hello, guy. And a special shout out to the guy who keeps downvoting our videos. Fred is very obsessed with this.
I'm obsessed because you champion of the gravitationally challenged thumb. I'm just very fond of the idea that you're personally searching out every single video we make just to click on the button that goes, I don't enjoy this. Who the fuck are you, Queen Victoria or something? Anyway, should you ever want to appear on the show and tell us why you hate us, let us know, because we're
please get in touch with us. Yeah. I'm sure Fred would love to have a chat with you.
It would be fucking brilliant. I'm a very nice guy, but yeah.
Yeah, it would be great. We welcome you on the show if you do exist.
We salute you by using the gesture of your people.
Yes. So on that auspicious note, first let me congratulate my dear co-host for successfully moving into his apartment and already, as far as legend will tell, bash his own brains in against the slanted wall.
Yeah, I have a couple of slanted walls. It's a place right under the roof. So, but it's not as bad as I had expected. It's actually very spacious, as you can probably tell from the reverb, which is a bit more present than it used to be.
I enjoy it very much, and I shall enjoy it for the rest of this broadcast. Okay. So on that note, why don't we just roll the intro?
Yeah.
Now you just leave interpretation up to me, Sugar Pie.
King boom! Did you see that?
Well, I was busy soiling myself.
Okay.
But I smelled it.
Yes. So we are back, and today we are going to be talking about something that is very near and dear to our hearts, because we both fancy ourselves as musicians, even though we aren't. Or as I suppose never mind. That train of thought has no place here.
We're happy amateurs, and I suppose you could say we're gifted, but not necessarily gifted in the way that everyone would prefer listening to. So
no, we're gifted in our own minds. Yeah. At least I am. Yeah. So what we are going to talk about is sound design.
Yeah,
in the sound design. Yes.
Because like a famous director, and this has nothing to do with adventure games, I know, but the famous director Sergio Leone, who directed The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, once said that sound is 50% of the experience. I believe the quote actually goes, it's at least 50% of the experience. And we've talked about immersion and, on the technical level, so sound definitely has a part to play in adventure games as well.
So we're really just jumping from text adventures with no sound, no graphics, to the importance of sound design in an interactive experience.
And beer.
Oh, yes. Obviously beer is the, the sixth sense of anything adventure game related. Because smell and taste is obviously a huge part of it too. But let's focus on the one sense, the one with the ears.
The sound. So yeah, anyway, should we get historical as we like doing? Because obviously way back when you didn't have a lot of sound. You had a PC speaker, or if you were lucky, you had a Tandy, which could produce like 3 voices at once. Yeah. But, that was basically a choice of either 1 or 3 unison farts in a cardboard box. That's pretty much what it sounded like.
Or if you stepped on a cat's tail like really hard in a cardboard box.
It was awful. But you know, some companies managed to do some pretty creative shit with it. We've talked about Access, and some other companies actually would modulate speech into the beeps or a noise sound you could produce via the speakers. So you had speech coming from this non-sound card.
You're right. I have no fucking idea how they did that. If anyone wants to know, you should go and ask Joe over at the Upper Memory Block. What was the episode? I think it was. I think it was the Tex Murphy episode where he explained how Real Sound, the proprietary system that Access delivered, how that actually managed to produce speech and digital audio through the PC speaker.
Yeah.
It's way too complicated for me to even wrap my head around.
But it is really interesting, and you know, it goes to show, like we've talked about graphics and stuff before. You know, people were trying to tell their stories with as many you know, tools at their disposal as possible. So
yeah, and there is. Sorry.
Yeah, I just it sounded like I was about to go on, but it's pretty interesting. You know.
Yeah. So you farted in a cardboard box, right? But there is something to be said for the endearing sounds of the you know, synthesizers of yesteryear, because going historically, we're talking first of you know, bleeps and bloops out of the PC speaker, and you've got these sound cards that were invented with onboard synthesizers. You've got your ad-libs, and you've got your sound blasters with your OPL3 chips and whatnot, and your and we're still in farts in a cardboard box territory. But then on the other side of the spectrum, outside of the PC, you've got the Commodore 64 with the SID chip, which Kevin just mentioned over on the IRC channel. I was going to anyway, because that sounds so fucking amazing in my book. And these are all. I'm purposely not talking about the AWE32, the Sound Blaster AWE32. I'm purposely not talking about the Amiga, because those went into the digital age. So should we like touch briefly on the FM synthesis or the synthesizers?
I suppose we could. I know a tiny little bit about FM. It stands for frequency modulation, and it became all the rage back in the early 80s, I suppose. One of the early synths of the time that got extremely popular was the Yamaha DX7. You know, it wasn't the first DX synthesizer, but if you
was the seventh.
If you've heard a record from the 80s, you've heard the DX7, which, yes, I suppose was the seventh synthesizer in the DX series.
Well, probably not, but fuck it, I have no idea. But we're not talking sound cards here. We're talking a standalone box with you know, keys on it that you press and then sound comes out. This is a musical instrument. Yeah.
And obviously you had like a keyboard version, you know, with a full spectrum of keys on it, and you had I suppose, I think so, a sound module version. And we're getting to that later on, I suppose, with the Roland MT32, which is basically a big wavetable synthesizer in a box.
Right. But there is something to be said for the old days of FM synthesis, because you know, at the time we're still talking about you know, games having to come on 1.44 megabyte floppy disks or even less than that, and so you couldn't feasibly put let's say a digital soundtrack onto these things, because even with the invention of the Sound Blaster, and now you have digital audio, digital sound effects. Today's you know, we take the size of an MP3 kind of for granted, you know, 6 or 7 megabytes. I mean, who gives a shit? There was 1.44 megabytes free space on a floppy disk. If you were going to do digital soundtracks to those old games, there was no feasible way to do that. So
that's true, and you know, audio compression hadn't really developed into the thing it is now. And I've got a sort of relevant anecdote. Do you remember the shitty 1990s band called Venga Boys? They did a bunch of shit techno, and I was in you know, middle school, I suppose, at that time, you know, 3rd, 4th grade. So I was somehow, you know, I managed to listen to the Beatles next to listening to this shit. Anyway, they did a song called Tarzan of the Jungle. You know, the yeah bullshit.
Trying not to remember it. Yeah.
This was way back before MP. Way back, they just hadn't become that widespread yet. So I had my best friend copy this song to me via floppy.
Oh my god.
An uncompressed red book quality WAV file split. I believe I came home with like 30 floppies. I had to sit down and reassemble this song painstakingly through WinZip or some shit. And the worst part of it is if you look up this song, you'll know immediately within the first second or so that it wasn't remotely worth it.
But we've all had this experience of trying to copying something onto a bunch of floppy drives or floppy disks that had no intrinsic value whatsoever. I mean, I've done the same thing when MP3s came out. Yeah,
we've gone through this once, in that disk space was ridiculously expensive once, and now we just take it for granted,
Completely, and we also take for granted, the fact that you can now cram an entire symphonic orchestra into a computer game soundtrack, because it just sort of kicks back in the middle of the game and does its thing. Because now you got like 70 gigabytes downloads of games and such. But the good thing about FM syntheses, and this is of some interest to me as amateur musician, was because briefly, what it does, I'm sure most of you who are listening to this already know, but I feel like explaining it. It's basically reading off like an internal sheet music thing. I mean, the actual music file is just data telling the sound card which notes to play at any given time. So it's really up to the sound card to replicate the sound.
And this is also extremely fascinating, because MIDI is like archaic, and this is one thing that has persisted. I mean, we're talking about technology that kept evolving. You went from beeps and boops to the symphonic orchestra on a 70 gigabyte download you mentioned. But MIDI has been constant since it was first invented in 1983, I think. So someone just came up with this incredible standard of organizing musical data and sending that back and forth between instruments, and it's still in use. It never dies out.
No, because you still use sequencers to compose music, to program stuff, but the interesting part about FM synthesis in computer games back in the day was, in my mind, it's kind of parallel to. Instead of listening to a recording of a symphony, you go to a theater hall and you hear the symphony performed by an orchestra, and each orchestra would perform it slightly differently. Maybe the flutist really sucked or had a cold or something. It would sound different each time, and as it would with different sound cards, and even some really shitty sound cards, it would sound different on the same sound card, depending on how shitty it was. Ad-lib.
That's true. Yeah, it wasn't entirely stable, but at least it was more stable than if we're going into the musical side of things, or musical non-game side of things, which this has now devolved to. It's still better. It's still better than the analog synthesis of yore, where you had no way to sync up your instruments. Some instruments had like a voltage input output, so you could like send an electrical current that would carry some information about tempo or whatever, but this didn't always work, and these things would go out of tune and it would just be ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
So MIDI and digital synthesizers were game changers.
Yeah, they were. Because do you remember the fun time between good old FM synthesis, bleepy bloopy type shit, and Ken Allen's infamous hellish bells on the OPL3 synthesizer and such, up to the little bit in between where we started doing half FM synthesis, half sampled sounds, like the AWE32, and I suppose the Roland MT32 as well. Those were fun times.
Yeah, true. Well, MT32 was fucking expensive, but MT32 shared its what the hell was it called? LA synthesis, which with Roland's flagship at the time, the Roland D50. And if you, and I think I've mentioned this on your podcast once, if you listen to Bad by Michael Jackson, the entire album, you will hear a lot of stock sounds from the Roland D50 that were carried over to the MC32, because when they were recording that album, someone came in with a D50, which was a brand new synth at the time, and went, use this. But they were in a rush, so they didn't have any time to program new patches for it. So you get stuff like Soundtrack and Fantasia. Gary Newman used it a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, good old Gary Newman. I mean, the dude, the only reason he became a synth pop pioneer was because he was in the studio to record a punk album, and someone had left a Moog synthesizer in the corner, and just walks over to it and goes, boop, and he goes, "This is awesome. I shall record my whole album on this."
Actually, it's pronounced Moog. Well, actually, it's about ethics and games journalism.
Boom!
But it is pronounced Moog, seriously. Anyway, we're heading to the Digression University here.
Yep.
So if we backtrack a bit, where does that leave us?
The thing, okay, in my mind, the timeline was we will do PC speaker, FM synthesis, wavetable sounds, and then we head on to the digital soundtrack. And once we hit digital soundtracks, we can talk about, the mood and such, the Moog and such. But if you had another path in mind,
No, not really. Not really. I'm just trying to steer us away from the music thing that I got us into. But anyway, I suppose you could summarize it really, really quickly by saying that what happened in popular music mirrored in what happened in video games.
You could say that. You could say that. I mean, popular media has always influenced music, and music has always influenced popular media, as if music wasn't popular media to begin with. But like movie soundtracks from the 80s have that distinctly 80s kind of feel to it. So did games of the 90s had a distinctly 90s kind of feel to it.
That is true. But of course, you couldn't, unless you had a Roland MC32 or some of the sound modules from Roland that followed, you kind of had to cram an entire synth that could produce music based on the MIDI information into one little chip, and that's what the AdLib was. It was basically one OPL3 FM synthesizer chip producing everything.
The AdLib was an OPL2, I think.
Oh, it was.
Someone correct me if I'm wrong.
But OPL is definitely correct.
Oh, yes.
Whether it was 2 or 3, I don't know. I've never owned one. I had an OPL3 chip.
Someone's going to correct us on the technical details. But steering this into what it was that we wanted to talk about, the idea of sound design. I think in my mind, the reason why we went through the little historical perspective was that these days we're kind of used to, okay, we can put any sound we want into the game.
And we're not limited to mono or stereo. We have full-on surround. And there was a time where someone had to take all the dialogue of "Let Down Mercilessly" to make it fit on a Redbook audio CD, where you also had to carry the data track just to make room for all the voices. Right.
But to be able to put in, I mean, that was one of the stepping stones as well. Before we had before computers were fast enough to play an MP3 in the background or a wave in the background while processing graphics and all of this jazz. We're so used to being able to put whatever sound we want into a game that when we look at 90s games and the sound design that the evocation of moods, if you want to use fancy language, becomes much more tricky for the composer, because you're limited to whatever sounds the sound cards of the time could produce, and you had to compose sound that would evoke certain moods for a variety of different sound cards. Your piece of music would be played on, like a million different types of.
That's very true.
So
you don't have problem anymore, since it's just, I suppose, digitally recorded. I mean, today you can do something like iMuse, which we should probably be getting into as well separately, because iMuse was a fucking awesome music system. But people I know for a fact, and you know this too because we've talked to the man, lucky us, guys like Ken Allen would actually compose stuff for the MC32, knowing that he would have to do a downgraded version later. Because
oh my God, we're losing him. Oh, sorry, your connection just stuttered madly, and your
Oh,
video cut out, and I was like, oh fuck, the solar
my
flare has.
internet is not fantastic here. I'm planning to cancel it and get something new at some point.
Build one from scratch, or not.
I shall build my own interwebs with blackjack.
Yeah, sure. Shit, what was I gonna say? Yeah, actually, I'm very glad you brought up iMuse because you couldn't just put any sound into a game. Like, okay, I want the sound of running water, and I have, as a composer with the digital audio, I have a complete and utter control over how my game sounds. Back in the day, you had to sort of, like you say, compose for one thing and then sort of downgrade it to different types of audio stuff.
I think even for stuff like the MT32, polyphony was probably limited. I mean, you couldn't do London Symphony Orchestra on this thing. You couldn't have 70 volts playing all at once because it would just take this thing and just grind it to a halt.
Exactly. So things that you could do with FM synthesis that you can't do with digital audio are things like the iMuse system, which I think is so fucking brilliant, and I can't imagine why no one else has thought of this before or after, or somehow adapted digital audio to do this. I think it's so amazing what iMuse can do.
I gotta correct you before we get into what iMuse is, because I think people have done it with digital audio. I mean,
really?
There are plenty of games where the dynamic shifts, and I'm thinking of one in particular, but fuck me if I can remember the name. But I know there is one game at least where one of the selling points was that the soundtrack would change as, music will suddenly get more tense or more calm depending on what's happening. But I don't think it's an adventure game. I will concede that it's probably not as widely spread in adventure games as it once was.
Okay, and still, I must question the technical aspect of it, because I have no idea what game you're talking about, but I'm guessing that it's just a bunch of MP3s sort of cross-fading into each other. Whereas with
you're not limited by CPU power or polyphony to the same extent, so you could have, as long as you had like a MIDI track or something that told you tempi, you could play 2 or 3 tracks, and then you could, eliminate one track, shift to another, and cross.
That was the
not entire pieces of music, but the individual voices of it.
I think that the
brilliant thing, people are doing this.
I don't think they are. I mean, the brilliant thing that iMuse did, obviously, for those of you who aren't in the know, what the brilliant thing about iMuse is that you can turn on and off different channels in the same piece of music. So, for instance, in Day of the Tentacle, you've probably noticed that when you're just standing still in the mansion, this little piece of music runs. But once you start moving Bernard around the mansion, a little snare drum kicks in, and once you stand still, the snare drum kind of fades out and such.
The music changes depending on your location, and Day of Tentacle is one example. The best example, I think, is Wood Tick and Monkey Island 2.
Oh yeah, that thing is huge, because that thing is one huge music file. It doesn't actually change once you go into places on the screen. Sorry, my vocabulary just went. Over on the IRC channel, Kevin is saying that the Ape Escape on PSX was the first one I can think of that was sliding to different channels. Now, in my mind, having a piece of music running as an MP3 or a WAV file, like say the strings are a WAV file in one, and then the drums are another WAV file, and the guitar is another WAV file. Such having those, having one file running is enough, but having to mix several of them together, making sure they're in the right tempo, making sure they're fired, and then turning them on and off and such, doesn't sound like fun for the programmer or the CPU.
I'm very sure it's a possibility, but I'm not sure if it's a possibility in like Unity or the Unreal Engine. Or you probably have to, to a certain extent, really get down and dirty with the code to do it. But I am pretty sure that there are some games doing it. But I think we're mainly in FPS territory,
No, we're in ethics and games journalism.
Boom!
There, I got one in.
Yeah, but anyway, in a first-person shooter where the music will turn more tense when there's an enemy close by. I think that's what we're dealing with. It's not really being utilized in.
No, in those cases, it's just cross-fading music. I'm sure of it. There's one MP3 file, and then there's another, and once the shit starts getting heavy, the one MP3 will then crossfade into the other, kind of like how a DJ mixes music together. Most of the time, they don't even bother, matching up the tempos and shit. It's just
Grim Fandango claimed to implement iMuse, at least on the package, or is that just me?
I would think you were mistaken, sadly, because that thing does use a digital soundtrack, which they re-recorded. And thank you very much, Peter McConnell, for doing that, because the remaster soundtrack is really, really awesome. Talk about sound design, by the way. Even not talking about the whole crossfading and stuff like that. Just setting the mood with the right instruments and the right instruments. Sorry again, and the right.
Drink.
and just there's an awful lot of this is why people love Grim Fandango, for the the dialogue and the setting and such, but mostly because the music really, really underpins what the game world wants to be, and it's this really sort of jazzy Mexican kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a very eclectic score. Like, it's a very eclectic game. But it works in favor of it. It's pretty brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, and conversely, a game like Space Quest, for instance, has this mock grandiose score, at least during the intros and such. Whenever something fantastic, especially Space Quest 5 does this, it has every time something happens, it's like the entire orchestra just packs itself into your sound card and just goes ba-da.
Yeah, that's true.
Even though something completely silly is happening.
Space Quest in general did tap into that whole John Williams thing, the
Right.
Star Wars score. So
there's an interesting anecdote about who was Alan Silvestri, the dude who did the Back to the Future soundtrack, going into movie territory. But there's a point to this. When Robert Zemeckis was directing the first movie, he said, right, I don't really have any huge big scenes. I don't have any huge sets. Everything is just sort of it's quite contained, actually. So what I want you to do, Mr. Silvestri, is just write the biggest fucking epic score you ever can, because that'll make the movie seem so much bigger. And he did, and it does seem like a huge movie, even though, I mean, you don't notice that 90% of the movie takes place in very confined spaces.
that's actually very true. It could play out like a low-budget movie.
It could, with the right amount of Huey Lewis in the news. It could have just been another stock 80s movie.
But that makes sense, because I will confess that part of the reason why I never found Secret of Monkey Island to be a very appealing game, and certainly not a very funny game, is that most of it is played in complete silence. The CD version added not bad any music pieces, and I'm not being a total heretic here. I acknowledge that it is a classic and it is a great game, but it just doesn't work for me that so many punchlines are just silent.
I know exactly what you mean, because that game, I mean, the opening theme is of course a classic, and it completely sets the scene for what's coming up, and you kind of have that playing in the back of your head as you're wandering around Melee Island in complete silence. I mean, what other points in the game is there music? Once you go into the scum bar, and once you hit,
there are music at very random spots, I find. I don't think Stan has his theme at that point, but there is a theme playing once you head into the forest.
Is there? I thought the forest was silent too. It's been years since I played this.
There's regular
humming that.
that was just the bass part. I'm about to head into the drum part now.
Sorry.
There's a reggae theme playing when you chase the shopkeeper. But that's a really odd choice to have a theme for that and then just leave most of Melee Island in total silence. At the very least, they could have done a dramatic little theme when Meat Hook shows you the beast, for instance.
Yeah. Ta-da!
That also plays out in total silence, and it's just anticlimactic. I guess people back then were used to it, but to someone who got into the series via Curse of Monkey Island and then later Monkey Island 2, it's just, you know, it just doesn't work.
But Monkey Island 2 did have wall-to-wall music everywhere you went, and it was kind of one thing I love about LucasArts' style of incidental music, or just music that plays while you're just walking around, is it kind of just sounds like a band just sort of jamming. It's not like a song that plays with the recognizable beginning, middle, and end, and then it loops and such. It just sounds like people just standing around, going dum da 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 da.
That's very true. Monkey Island 2 had an awesome. I'm not usually into reggae, but it has some great reggae tunes. And of course, even though they couldn't use iMuse to the same extent, they still do some crossfade trickery on the remake. They went in and re-recorded the whole thing when they did the special edition. And that's
Monkey Island 2?
Gorgeous. Yeah, with like real horns, real drums, real bass, real guitar,
but
real sounds.
Right, but they couldn't do the thing with the,
They attempt to simulate it, but I think part of the problem is, and again, I'm sure you can do it. I must confess I don't currently know any games that do it, but I think you can do the crossfading with digital audio as well. But of course, the Monkey Island 2 Special Edition is very limited by the fact that it runs on the original SCUM engine. It's the original code that has been updated a bit, and they've added new graphics.
Right, but again, setting the scene and such. I mean, Sam & Max does this. Dave the Tentacle does it. I love how Dave the Tentacle takes pretty much the same themes and then transposes them to colonial times. So it's basically the same theme, but playing with colonial times type instruments in MIDI, of course. But anyway. Yeah, LucasArts were really, really good at sound design, and conversely,
weren't they also among the first, as far as adventure games go, to license music? No Girl in the Tower doesn't fucking count. But
no, that's not licensed music. That's just atrocious in-house music.
But the Full Throttle intro, I mean, man, you got a great MIDI theme going, and then Ben goes, whenever I think of Maureen, I smell whenever I smell I think of Maureen. Whenever I smell anything, I actually am all about ethics and games journalism. And then Legacy by the Bone Jackals kicks in.
Right. Yeah, that was, to my knowledge, that might have been the first licensed music, not counting, of course, the Star Wars themes for Rebel Assault.
Yeah, but it's a great fucking addition. If we're strictly speaking about adventure games, then I suppose it had to be the first use of it.
That must have been the first, because up until that point, getting someone to do a score for an adventure game or really any computer game was not. I mean, you had composers working for the company making the game. You wouldn't like call up someone and say, hey, you want to come compose a score for my game? And they go, what's a computer game? Why would I do that?
Not entirely true.
Okay, Bob Siebenberg. All right, I know Bob Siebenberg.
Not Siebenberg exclusively. I was going to mention the guy who worked on King's Quest IV, whom I can't remember the name of.
Oh, right, yeah, the movie composer.
Hollywood composer, not aliens or anything, but
I'm pretty sure the story with Bob Siebenberg is the same as I am very, very sure the one with the King's Quest IV dude is. Ken Williams calls up the agency and goes, "We would like someone to compose a score for this thing that we're doing." And the first thing they have to do is explain to them what the hell is an adventure game, what is a computer game, why are we doing this? It's basically like scoring a movie. No, it isn't, and such. But it's not like composers or musicians or whatever would flock to game companies and say, "Hey, I would really like to score this game that you're working on because that sounds fantastic."
That's very true. That only happened. I think that only happened later on. Where you got people like Michael Dorn and Mark Hamill and Leia Remini voicing Gabriel Knight, Tim Curry as well, and Christopher Walken appearing in that hideous FMV game that I can never remember the name of.
Reaper. No,
yeah. I mean. I think in the mid '90s, people from different industries kind of saw the light, and now you've got you wound up getting people like Trent Reznor working on Quake, and in the music.
I was just going to say that. I think Reznor working on Quake is probably the first time that a musician has gone up to a game company and said, "Would you like me to compose some music?"
Yeah, because
resulting in a fantastic score.
Quake predates, obviously that's not the whole score, but doesn't Tex Murphy Overseer feature a song by, why the hell am I thinking about B.B. King? I don't think it's B.B. King, but there's it's Richie Havens doing Texas Lament, isn't it? And, you know, Richie Havens opened fucking Woodstock, so he was pretty much a legend.
Oh yeah, no, he did songs for the Pandora Directive. Again, I'm not sure that he actually approached Access to do that. I think he just, you know, was roped into it.
He was probably approached, but he wasn't a nobody by any means, and he wasn't in the game industry.
Oh, and I have to bring up, again, not adventure games, but I have to bring up Brian May from Queen doing the soundtrack for Rise of the Robots, or not. Apparently he did compose an entire soundtrack to the game, and but in the end, copyrights and stuff just resulted in them having one guitar chord that is ostensibly recorded off a cassette tape he dropped off somewhere. One guitar chord during the intro, and then the rest of the game was in complete silence.
Oh, that is such a shame, because Brian May is an awesome man. I'm having visions of back when Windows Vista was released. There was all this hullabaloo about, oh yeah, the new Windows Start sound has been made by Robert Fripp from King Crimson, and it's just...
Wasn't it Brian Eno who did the Windows Start sound?
Brian Eno did the Windows 95
right.
intro. But Vista was Fripp, but it was just so brief and so, you know, uncharacteristic of Robert Fripp that you wouldn't know if you didn't read it. I would love if whenever Vista started, it just launched into Thrak by King Crimson. That would actually have been appropriate.
It just launches into a 7-minute prog rock epic. Okay, are we still booting? Can I skip?
But, no, it takes 7 minutes for Vista to start, so I suppose it did.
Exactly. So let's start a little interaction here. When it comes to sound design, and I suppose we can talk about sound effects as well. But on the music side, what do you think are the core elements of setting the scene? You've got a certain genre of a game, and you've got and you're the musician who has to compose the score for this. What are the first things that you sort of lock yourself into with regards to music design?
I suppose it depends a lot. Do I want to support the mood of the scene we're currently in, or do I want to play off it? Do I want to create a contrast? This is sort of relevant to what Kevin just mentioned on the IRC channel, in that Fallout, while not strictly being adventure games, had licensed music. And I love how those games start with like maybe, and I don't recall what it's called, I don't want to set the world on fire or something, by the Ink Spots. So you got this 1950s vocal-oriented jazz music, which is very cheerful, playing off against basically nuclear rubble.
Right.
So do I want to do something like that, because that can be pretty great, or do I want to underpin the movie? I suppose my word is that try to leave it to the composer and see what he or she will come up with. Give them as much freedom as possible. I can't tell you what my way of approaching something like adventure game sound design would be, because it varies a lot based on what
you just did one. All right, so what I didn't mean a specific scene, but that also brings up an interesting point, in that sound design for an adventure game is not the same as sound design for a movie, because with a movie you can hit certain beats during the dialogue or during the action or whatever, whereas in a computer game you don't know when the player is going to do whatever. So there's that. But I was kind of speaking more generally, because you just did the soundtrack for Late Last Night, our little adventure jam thingy there, and you did three bits of music for three very different localities.
Because I did a credits theme, which is basically just a short loop, just to fill out the time.
All right, but
so that was a case. That was a line. But yeah, I suppose what I did was just to do something that underpinned the mood of what I had access to, which was the background art for those 3 rooms that we have. So, you know, you got the Mer Pirate Lagoon, where I went into this little mermaid type thing because I thought that would fit. It's very idyllic. Then you got the steampunk vampire club called the Copper Fang, which is kind of cheesy. So I went for Ed Wood meets Kraftwerk, and finally,
808 beat, yeah.
Finally, you got the junk food forest, where I admittedly kind of went, fuck it, I don't know what a junk food forest sounds like, but I had a reggae theme that I had demoed like years beforehand that I just resurrected and put some sheen on it and made it loop, and I thought, you know, this is laid back enough to be a junk food forest. It kind of sounds like a hangover.
Exactly. The reason I asked that was because these are 3 very, very different, you know, scenes. You know, very different in art style and very different in mood and such. And to sort of to try and sort of make them all fit together, you know, is the job of the sound designer. Even if you go from, let's say,
well, that's the thing. I didn't try to make them fit together because what we did for late last night, obviously, was that each room has its own different art style. You know, the Mer Pirate Lagoon is hand drawn, the Copper Fang is pre-rendered 3D, and the Junk Food Forest is 2D Flash. So I didn't specifically think of making them fit together. You know, the opposite actually. I think I actively thought I don't have to do a job to make them fit together. You know, that it doesn't matter that there are, you know, are some contrasts between each theme, because, you know, that's how the rest of the game plays out. These are 3 distinct areas written and drawn by in different ways.
Oh yeah, sure. And you're absolutely right. But in terms of a you know, a bigger game where you go from one thing to the other, for some reason Final Fantasy VII springs to mind, where you start in this very cyberpunkish kind of city, and you spend forever in there, and then once you get out of it, suddenly you're in this huge forest, and then you're in this huge ice cave thing, and then you're just everywhere. Yeah. And the music still somehow manages to be you know, cohesive, but representative of the area you're in as well.
I guess you should have some base elements, but that can also fail spectacularly. You know, when I did the majority of the soundtrack, I think, for Space Quest Incinerations, I kind of wanted to simulate what it would sound like if you had a Roland MT32 that had kind of been augmented. You know, I would take some MT32 samples and have the majority of the pieces consist of those, and then I would add stuff that the MT32 could never have done. But it just kind of, I view it as a failure. You know, people have praised the music since, and I suppose I managed to put some decent melodies in there. But what I did with the sounds didn't work at all. And you know, what I tried to do, which was very different, just fell completely flat when a guy like Matthew Chastney, who's now working with Phoenix, went in and just one-up John Williams on the parts he did.
That was the movie score, or the FMV bits.
Yeah, whenever there's an epic cutscene, we cut to his you know, realistically simulated symphonic orchestra, and it just leaves everything I made sound very cheap.
Nah, I actually think it worked well, because yours, the stuff that you're doing in game, the music was actually very, you know, adventure gamey, and then you go into an FMV sequence where stuff is happening, and suddenly that you know, it's a different kind of, you know, feel. I didn't think the soundtrack was that disparate, but shit. Of course, you could,
but you know, as a composer, you're always your own worst judge. You know, in my mind, everything I've done sounds like shit.
Yeah, there you go.
I think a guy like Ken Allen would suffer from the same complex as well. You know, you're just never satisfied.
Oh, you are so my Ben Chandler. I mean, every time I listen to the Blue Cup Tools podcast, he always goes, "Oh well, my art is shit," and the dude just does the most magnificent 256 color art and stuff. Anyway, conversely, doing something. I mean, just wrapping this thing up. The thing I did for my game was that I had Brian. The What's in the Safe Adventure Jam game. What I did was I had Brian compose a central theme to it, and he was kind enough to send me the bits that made up the central theme, the different channels of it. And I just stuck those in a sequencer and composed the in-game sort of incidental music by just playing them at different speeds and just putting little bits of synths underneath it.
You actually did something that very primitively approximated iMuse, in that you had one theme that kind of changed depending on where you go to.
I would. Thank you so much, but I would actually kind of disagree. It's more of a. You're familiar with the term leitmotif.
Yeah.
I assume.
And I've used that extensively as well. Actually, that's one thing I try to do. I can tell you that I try to come up with a strong theme. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail, for characters and locations and stuff. If you have a leitmotif, then you're partly there. I would say it's a very effective tool to use, as evidenced by stuff like which is now iconic.
Oh yeah. But and going into computer games, a game like The Seventh Guest, which for all its faults has a magnificent soundtrack. You've got six guests. They all have their own theme, and the cool thing about The Seventh Guest's music is that not only do the guests have their individual themes, the themes are all played on a different. I mean, each character has his own instrument. Like one dude has the oboe, the other has the flute and such. And even better, their themes can be played simultaneously. So they can actually complement each other. When there's a dialogue scene, he actually plays, like when one girl is talking, there's a trumpet sound, and then the oboe cuts them off and such. It's really, sound design wise, it's really.
The Gabriel Knight remake actually does this, opposed to the original, I would say, because Robert Holmes did this great stripped down version of the Voodoo Museum theme, and that kind of becomes the voodoo theme as the game progresses. It's playing at the voodoo ceremonies, and it's kind of Dr. John's leitmotif now.
And Robert Holmes really runs the leitmotif idea almost into the ground. I mean, that iconic Gabriel Knight theme, ding 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 ding, that just is everywhere. So, of course, you can go into the completely opposite ditch and have completely shitty sound design that doesn't match what's happening on screen at all. Yeah. Hello, Ripper from Take Two Interactive. Basically, it's just a drum beat, a sound canvas drum beats that loops infinitely, or it sounds like someone's tuning a piano. It's just, what the hell? Did you run out of time?
I think I've been fortunate enough to avoid games that have shit sound design and music. That is probably partly because if I was faced with something like that, I would switch it off, because that's how I am. I can't stomach
Really?
shit.
No, wait. You could still enjoy a game with a fantastically stupid score and still, kind of find charm in it, I suppose.
Well, it's me personally. I can't think of any examples. You could be right, but the fact alone that I can't think of any examples.
Actually, I would go as far as say Martian Memorandum. The Tex Murphy, the second Tex Murphy game. Even though the intro music is repeatedly stuck in my head. Most of the in-game music is just some dude on the drums. For the entire game.
Pandora Directive has some stingers as well. It has a mostly brilliant score, but Roswell is just the sound of someone who fell asleep on the synthesizer.
Yeah, exactly. It's really weird with the Tex Murphy games, because once an FMV clip plays, like in Under Killing Moon and Pandora Directive and Overseers, the score is really fantastic, but the in-game music is always really, really strange.
Fortunately, they rectified it. I think when I played Tesla Effect the first time, when I listened to the intro, there was a fucking tear in my eye. I mean, shit. I can't remember the name of the guy who composed it, but he basically went in and pulled a Hans Zimmer on us. You know, like every movie today has these big courtesy of Inception, and he went in and did that, and it's just the most epic fucking adventure game theme of all time. You know, actually, I'll state that one more time for the world. Tesla Effect features the best theme song or theme tune to an adventure game that I've ever heard, ever.
Oh, that's a bold statement.
Yeah, it is.
But you're entitled to your
Monkey
opinion, of
Island is iconic, but I can think of nothing else that just sent me back into my seat going, wow, this I'm gonna watch a movie now, you know. I'm really gonna get into it.
It does have the advantageous thing of being produced contemporarily, so they could just throw anything they had at the sound design, I suppose. Going back in the heydays of adventure games, as opposed to the LucasArts games, which were kind of jammy sort of things, other games would just basically play like little tunes, little melodies that would loop. And Space Quest 4 in particular, not counting Xenon in Space Quest 12, obviously, but these were like little ditties that would repeat so often that they would get stuck in your head.
Over on the IRC channel, Kevin has a request, I believe, in that we bring up the Skull synthesizer once again.
So how would
Can you imagine how the Roswell theme from the Pandora Directive would smell?
Fuck you. I like the Pandora Directive Roswell theme because it's nerve-wracking. It's really. I mean, it gets your blood pumping.
But it's nerve-wracking for 30 minutes, which is maybe I find that nerve-wracking moments are usually best kept to, because of pacing, to a couple of minutes. But this thing just plays on forever.
I don't know. I thought that word, but it's who cares? The ending to Beneath the Steel Sky has the same thing going, where it's this, a lot of high-pitched sounds and a lot of really nerve-wracking music, and it goes on for quite a while, and I somehow never get tired of it either.
Yeah.
So where are we going with this? Are we going to reach a conclusion anytime soon?
I suppose this caps off a slightly unorganized episode, but I think we got around the block.
Oh yeah, sure. The importance of sound design cannot be understated.
It's a very abstract subject, and sound design is very important, but it's not necessarily quantifiable. It's very hard to pinpoint what it does and how you do it. But
it's very easy to pinpoint. Also, look at the kitty. Look at the kitty.
Oh, kitty.
So it's very easy because as we've stated, a good sound design. Sorry.
It's easy because all you need is love.
Oh yeah, and ethics in games journalism. Boom. What a good sound design does is it underpins the mood, and it's sort of instead of just going all over the place, you sort of have this thematic thread that runs through the game. Unless it's one of those really weird games like Late Last Night that has 3 locations that are completely separate from each other. And bad sound design is when someone just headbangs his synthesizer, goes to sleep on it. We were watching like the early X-Files episodes not long ago, and most of the first seasons, like first 4 seasons or something, Mark Snow is just comatose, slumped over his synthesizer.
I'm pretty sure that's actually again a Roland D50 or some such, because he has found the bell patch and he just fell asleep.
Right.
That's narcoleptic. It sounds very much like the synths of that time.
Oh yeah. Oh, Kevin over in the RC channel is right. We didn't touch on sound effects at all. Maybe we should do that for sound design part 2.
Yeah. This is a very difficult subject to pin down, and I think we're I agree with your definition, obviously, in the sense that it's relatively easy to pinpoint what a good sound design type thing does or doesn't, but we're probably very inclined to talk about music when given the chance. So that's what happened.
So that is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So let's just make an on-air agreement. Let's just do sound design part 2 next week, and then talk about stuff that isn't music.
We're going to talk about sound effects and I suppose voices. We had a voice acting subject lined up, so let's see if we can cover all 3 bases.
Oh, that would be spectacular. Voice casting.
We'll probably be talking about the smell synthesizer.
Okay, briefly. Okay, I'm just going to throw a game title at you, and you tell me what it smells like. Okay, so first of all, Roswell in Pandora Directive.
What that smells like? Stale sweat and broken dreams.
There you go. Kevin mentioned World of Wonders in Space Quest 4.
World of Wonders. It smells cheap. It smells tacky. It smells like candy floss and plastic and disposable toys.
Shit.
Did you say World of Wonders in Space Quest 4?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant Monolith Burger. Oh, you're right. Absolutely. World of Wonders, Space Quest 3. All right, yeah. This is just, there is no point in continuing this anymore. That was a fun game, though.
We should bring it up again. What would this game smell like?
Yeah.
It'll all fall apart once we reach the dick.
Oh yes, okay. I can cover that one. That thing smells like cheap jewelry and disappointment.
I think it smells pretentious.
It smells like berets and cappuccinos.
It smells like whatever eau de cologne Liberace used.
Oh shit! All right, so
gassy.
Should I do the spiel?
Yeah, I've done the spiel for the last couple of times, haven't I? So take it away, Bob.
I'm gonna try. You can, of course, subscribe to this show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and wherever you want. If you want the audio version, you can do all of that over at backseatdesigners.podbean.com. You can check out the video episodes, which I think you might be doing right now, over at youtube.com/backseatdesigners. You can check out our blog where we announce shit and where we also post all sorts of interesting stuff over at backseatdesigners.com, which is also where you will find a handy web client for accessing our IRC channel, where you can chat with us during the show. You can find us on Twitter at bsdesigners.com. You can find our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/backseatdesigners, and you can all kiss my ass. I mean, you can all give us money if you go to patreon.com/backseatdesigners.
That is actually kissing our asses majorly. Also, you can't dislike our videos, but then we promise to turn your into.
Exactly. Oh, you are pure class, man.
Yeah. I have no room for criticism in my life.
Oh no.
No criticism, just balls to the walls arrogance and superiority.
I know how that smells. Stale. But we are, of course, why is that word so hard? Congratulally? Contractually.
You have actually also mentioned composures several times during this show as someone who composures music, I guess.
Did I do that?
Yeah, you did.
Go
back and listen to it right now.
Cool. Contractually obligated to thank Mr. Stephen Alexander for being a fantastic person with a fine hat.
Yeah,
and also our $8 backer.
And, congratulations on wrapping up yet another successful Kickstarter, Steve. Not many can do that, but Steven just flings himself into this shit, and he always comes out victorious. He's a good guy, so yeah, thank you, Steve.
Definitely is. And if you would also like to be part of that elite group where we are contractually obliged to thank you at the end of episodes, you can, go to patreon.com and throw $8 or more at us if you're really, really weird.
Yeah, because it's not worth $8, but who am I to argue with Steve?
No. I think he just. I think Steve's the one giving us the thumbs down on YouTube. Actually, he gives us $8 per episode, and then he goes in and goes, "Fuck."
Yeah, because he said we don't dedicate the whole fucking thing to thanking him.
It's like 1 hour of us just going, "Steve is great. Steve is great."
Yeah.
So yeah, join us next week for part 2, where we're gonna talk sound effects and perhaps even voices, or maybe that's gonna be a part 3. I don't know. Depends on how exciting the sound effects discussion will be.
But we know we all know it's going to be the return of the son of the smell synthesizer.
Oh yeah, and ethics and games journalism. That joke is kind of
journalism. It's getting stale. I don't even know. As I was pointing out on the RSC channel earlier, I don't even know what Gamergate is about anymore. It's not cool to make fun of something you don't know what's all about.
It's passé. It's passé now. Nothing ever happened. It was just a fart in a glass of water. So anyway, this show just got political.
Like the rest of Adam Baldwin's career.
Oh, and on that bombshell, let's just Jeremy Clarkson this thing out into the stratosphere, and say we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
No more for today.